I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 31, where we're going to talk about metaphysics, Buddhism, nihilism, atheism, and Christianity. But first, I just want to, we're not drinking coffee. You know by now, or Matt's still drinking coffee. I've moved on to seltzer. You know that we record multiple episodes in the same day. So we don't have a coffee review. But what I want to ask is, we've both reached out to some musicians to get like some theme music for this podcast, and no one's responded. If you are a musician, not a magician.
Yeah.
You could be a magician as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
But if you're a musician and you want to compose like a 30-second something, or give us permission to use a little bit of your song, and we'll post stuff in the credits or whatever, that would be cool.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And we'd appreciate it. Musicians are audio magicians.
I guess they are producing something from nothing.
Yeah. I'm trying to think how you would do magic with on a podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a... I'll have to do
the only way you can do it is like mind reading kind of thing.
Yeah, that would be hard too, though, because a lot of those things that you get cues from or watching, I guess you could do it like bring someone into the...
There's logic magic tricks.
Yeah. Where
like it's math.
Right.
There can only at the end be one.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing I think that you could pull off.
Yeah. Do you remember the David Copperfield special where he made the Statue of Liberty disappear, but in between there was like some like a very similar. It was like, put your finger on any number on this screen. Yeah. And you like touch it. He's like, no, make sure you keep touching it. He's like, now divide that. Like think about the number per like, and by the end, like he picked your number, but like it had to always fall on 3 because of the directions that he gave.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I very distinctly remember moving my finger around the old tube television.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I loved those things. There's lots of things from the 90s that were on that I forget about, and then people remind me, and I go, why did that show only last, a season or whatever? Like, why did that get canceled? That was awesome. Yeah. Do you remember the Saturday morning cartoon where where
yes, I remember Saturday morning cartoon.
Which one? But the one like the Wish Kid with Macaulay Culkin.
No, I don't remember that at all.
He could make wishes, and I think it was voiced by Macaulay Culkin.
Huh.
And somebody brought that up a couple of years ago. They're like, all right, I was scrolling and I saw it, and I go, totally forgot about that show, but there was a time in my life I watched it. Yeah. Every Saturday morning.
Netflix is good for that. Like they brought back She-Ra and He-Man. So like I got my kids to watch the original He-Man and She-Ra, and then they like rebooted them and had like new ones that are just as good. Yeah. But like My Little Pony came back out, and then they also do the documentaries of like back in the 80s. I don't know if you've seen any of those, but they'll have a whole episode on like video games from your childhood, movies from your childhood, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember Nightmare on Elm Street. That was so scary when I was 7.
Nightmare on Elm Street ruined my life.
Really?
Like, that is the thing.
How'd it ruin your life?
That scene where Johnny Depp gets sucked into a bed.
Yeah. You were terrified of going to...
Yeah. Yeah. Still am. That actually had a deep psychological effect on me. That and Unsolved Mysteries. Yeah. And the episodes about like people kids getting kidnapped.
Yeah. America's Most Wanted. That's what.
Yes. And Rescue 911. Why were there all these shows in our childhood about like, here's all the horrible things that could happen?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it definitely made me more terrified walking to school, even though like the odds of running into one of America's Most Wanted is slim.
So I think you're a little bit older than me. Were you born in 80?
I was born in 80.
I was born in 82.
Yeah.
And
which for cartoons makes a big difference, because like 10 to 12, 12 to 14, like you're definitely partaking in different television.
I sometimes think things are the 90s when they're the 80s, because I think the first year I remember knowing what a year was 88.
Okay, mine was 86. Yeah. I remember the Challenger exploding. I was homesick from school that day. and my mom just made me watch it over and over and over, and I didn't understand, right?
Yeah.
Because it was like live broadcast TV, and I was like, can we like put on something else?
Yeah.
She's like, this is important. I'm like, it's gonna blow up again. Like, we've seen
Right.
this.
Right.
It's like my first very distinct memory.
I remember going to kindergarten in '88, and I think our first project, one of our first, it might not have been, but one of our first projects was to color a poster of the '88 presidential election. Bush and Dukakis.
Yeah.
And I knew Bush was going to win because I knew Americans would never vote for a guy whose name they couldn't pronounce. I just knew it at 6 years old. I was like, Bush is totally going to win this election. So that was my introduction to that. But then, like, I always think of, I always thought of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as a 90s show.
Oh,
It's an 80s show.
I think so.
I didn't realize it was an 80s show until I was an adult.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking,
It has to be, because I had the NES game. That's like notorious for being one of the hardest video games. Like the underwater scene where you're like keep getting electrocuted.
Yeah. I played that game. And the thing is about that too is I think of NES as the 90s.
Yeah.
Which is also wrong.
Yeah.
SNES is the 90s.
Yeah.
For some reason in my brains, like Super Mario World came out in like 86.
I think that's when Mario came out.
No, I mean not Super Mario World, like Super Mario Brothers, the first one. Was it 86?
I think so.
So I got that right. But then like Super Mario World like didn't come out till 93, and I think I'm completely wrong about that.
Yeah.
Like the SNES one.
Yeah.
It's probably 91.
I don't
90
know.
even.
I had both. My mom bought me the SES, the Super Nintendo with the power pad and the gun, which is like, holy crap.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was like, that was my only Christmas present.
I can feel that. That nostalgia when you just all you have to say is the duck hunt gun. And I can feel
And then
that feeling.
for Super Nintendo, when I got that, did you ever play any games with the bazooka? It was
No.
like the duck hunt gun, but it was a bazooka. Oh, dude.
There's an SNES bazooka?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's amazing.
My mind is blown. This episode is off the rails. There's an SNES bazooka.
Yeah.
Is there a Sega rocket launcher?
I have no. I was not a Sega man. I didn't like the 3-button system.
Right,
I was like, why don't you just have 4 like the Super Nintendo?
I was totally a Super Nintendo kid too, but I mean not as much as you because I didn't have a bazooka in my house.
Yeah, I mean, I had a slightly abusive mom who made up with it. Made up with it with presents, so I think that's part of it. Just real quick, the Ninja Turtles game. I remember sitting in front of the TV with my Walkman on, listening to Debbie Gibson's "Out of the Blue" album. She was my first crush.
This is awesome.
So like,
I don't know.
Like that's another distinct memory. It's like Challenger blowing up and then trying to beat that stupid underwater level in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles while listening to "Out of the Blue" on repeat. Yeah.
Man, I used to listen to Creedence Clearwater Revival while playing Sega Golf.
Nice.
That was the one soundtrack I can remember. I don't know if you guys are having as much fun as me and me are, but this is fun. I have one quick story about He-Man, and then we can
maybe we can transition
maybe we can. So I don't know if I said this before. I was actually baptized Catholic. My mother was. I was baptized as an infant in the Catholic Church. My mother was.
I don't think so. I think we talked about your father being Amish and your mom being Catholic. But.
Yeah. So my father, when I was born, like didn't care. So he was like, "Oh, yeah, you want to baptize him?" My maternal grandmother obviously was like, "We have to baptize him." So when I was really little, I was going to Catholic church with my grandmother and sometimes my mother. And I only relay this story as my mother has told it to me, because I think I was 2 or 3 years old. But when I was 2 or 3 years old, I was really into He-Man, and I would take my clothes off down to my diaper
to look like He-Man.
And I would carry around a yellow bat, and that would be my He-Man sword.
Nice.
So it's Easter Sunday. We're at church. You guys can already tell where this is going. And people have, you know how it is at church, at Catholic church, like people have their heads down and they're praying. And my mom took her eye off me for 1 second. I took off all of my clothes. Well, the thing is that you have to know is like the bat was the only thing that could keep me from not making a racket, like at church. So I have the bat.
Yeah.
And actually, it was my grandmother's idea. As I recall my mother telling the story, I think it was my grandmother's idea to give me the bat. It's like, give him the bat so he stops babbling and talking, and like let him just play with the bat. So heads bowed. There's a lot of standing and sitting in Catholic church. They're at a point in the service where they're sitting, and my mom took her eye off me for a hot second, and I stripped down and I stood up on the pew and I raised the yellow bat into the air and I yelled in the middle of Easter service, "By the power of Grayskull." And that's when they knew I was going to be a pastor.
So where does He-Man fall on the scale of atheist to Christian? Because there's at least some sort of supernatural power there.
Unfortunately, that's a great transition, but unfortunately, I don't remember anything about the plot
of He-Man.
Of He-Man, I don't remember anything. I can see it visually. I can see Skeletor, but I don't. So
like Skeletor is trying to take over the planet, and He-Man is trying to stop him. What's funny is when you get to She-Ra. She-Ra's villain was Skeletor's boss, and is actually trying to take over the universe. So he's actually like more powerful than Skeletor.
Yeah.
Which is just like kind of progressive for the 80s, where the female protagonist has the stronger antagonist, I guess.
Yeah. So, but He-Man's.
But like, how does Skeletor even talk with just a skeleton?
It's an age-old question.
There's no tendons.
In the
there's
internet
no muscles.
age, the stuff we realize, we're like, wait a minute, how does he even?
But there's magic, like his little Skeletor's Chica there. She's got the sorcerer, not the good sorceress that can turn into a bird.
Yeah, right.
But the other one, she's got like a magic wand that shoots stuff. And
yeah. Well, He-Man's like name when he's not He-Man, it's Prince Adam, right?
Yeah.
So does that have anything to do with like biblical?
I don't think so, because he's got parents that are like real parents.
I just wonder if there's like...
It's funny because it's like a super technologically advanced civilization, but they ride tigers.
I want to be a super technologically advanced society that rides tigers.
I guess that's true.
We got the Tiger King, right? The Netflix show. Is that what
it's Tiger King?
Tiger Man?
Yeah.
Tiger
I know what
King?
you're talking about. Did you watch that during COVID?
Like the guy from Oklahoma?
Mm-hmm.
No, I didn't watch it.
No,
I just know.
We're just down a rabbit trail of cultural... Oh, man. It was... Like, because COVID had just happened. It was like a cultural phenomenon, and I watched it, and I was like, this is insane.
Yeah.
Like a guy kills himself on camera trying to prove that he knows how to use a gun.
Really? That happens in that show?
Yeah, it's like security footage. So the guy's pointing a gun at someone else on the job, and the guy's like, dude, don't point a gun at me. Like,
yeah.
Right? And the guy holding the gun is like, dude, I know how to use a gun. It's not loaded, and puts it to his head and pulls the trigger. And he,
wait, you watch somebody die? Like
you it's off camera, but you watch the guy like you see the flash of the muzzle, you hear the gunshot, and then you see like the other employee like break down and run like. God. And then they're like, "What happened?" He's like, "Yeah, he totally shot himself in the head, trying to prove that the gun wasn't loaded, that he was pointing at me because I was really worried that I was going to get shot."
Wow. I canceled my Netflix subscription.
Yeah, I'll give you my password. That's not true, Netflix. I'm not password sharing at all.
But man, well, now how did you transition from that? Because I thought we were onto something with He-Man.
Yeah. So here's how He-Man can relate to Buddhism, right? It seems like there's always a chosen hero, like sort of Excalibur-esque for both of them, like. They touched the sword, and whether they were destined or like sort of Legend of Zelda-y too, like there's been a hero who's always had the Master Sword you're now on a quest to get it because you're the next chosen one. And the way I relate it to Buddhism, when we were talking during our break, is, Buddhism believes in reincarnation until you hit nirvana, right? And so you're constantly trying to find your sword, which would be like complete disassociation. Like the sword is, it's not to fight. I mean, it's sort of to fight evil, except there's no such thing as evil in Buddhism. It's just like your perspective. But you keep getting reincarnated, right? And like we were talking about how the previous episode you said nihilism, atheism, and Buddhism all have the same metaphysics, and I was kind of like, I don't know about that because of the reincarnation of Buddhism.
Right. What I meant was, and again, so in this era of bullshitting on a podcast, I have no attachment to my thesis here.
Oh, so you're Buddhist.
I just very good
in this very area.
Good. Somebody caught my reference for once. But yeah, I have no attachment to this thesis, but it's maybe good to work around in a podcast. I asked you, as like, why don't you just treat me like Socrates? And you were like, I can't do the Socratic method. But yeah, I threw out this idea that that Buddhism, nihilism, atheism come from the same metaphysics. Maybe that's not what I meant. I think what I meant was that that the metaphysics of Christianity as compared to, maybe metaphysics isn't the right thing. I'll just talk about death for a second. And the way that Christianity relates to death strikes me as unique. In that Christianity, more than anything else, I think takes it seriously. And even though there are different denominations and theologies that believe various things about how things come to be at the end of the age, and what happens after a person dies, what they all have together is like the idea of the immortality of an individual soul that persists after, and that the individual doesn't lose their individual self, and therefore the entire like myth of quote unquote salvation in Christianity is this salvation from eternal death, and in some cases salvation from eternal suffering in hell. Like, death is the enemy to be overcome. And I think in a certain way you could think of Buddhism as like overcoming death too, but the way that you're overcoming death in Buddhism is you're overcoming death as an illusion. Like, you're realizing that like death isn't real. As opposed to in Christianity, like, death is very, very real. The founder of the religion confronted it head on, and like every time you go to a worship service in Christianity, doesn't matter if it's Catholic or Protestant, if you do communion, you're confronting you're confessing the opposite of Buddhism's confession. The exact opposite. You're by partaking in communion, you're saying death isn't an illusion. It's something we all experience. It's something that even God himself experienced for us and with us. And that strikes me as like Buddhism is more compatible with, and maybe it's not metaphysics, but it's much more compatible, way closer to being compatible with nihilism and atheism than it is with Christianity or Islam. And then Judaism's an outlier a bit.
So, I'll agree with your last statement. Not that Judaism is an outlier, but that Buddhism is more compatible with atheism than Christianity. I think, besides Thomas Merton, again, but he's Confucian, which is close but different. But your premise is that Christianity deals with death more than any other faith.
I think
in a realistic.
Yeah, I think it has a realistic take on death.
So my question would be, so Israel gets conquered by Alexander the Great.
Yep.
Right. And the Jewish conception of the afterlife before the Hellenistic takeover is Sheol, which is kind of Buddhist. Like, you're all sort of like walking around in this like hazy, it's almost like you're an individual, but you're not. It's sort of like, I imagine like this gray area where all the ghosts are like slipping past each other and not really interacting. And then you have the conquest, and the Greeks I think have a very, like, death is real. A lot of you will lose your individuality to Hades, but some of you will be punished for eternity, and others get to go to the Elysian fields where you have, grapes and women and wine, and which seems like that's a very like as you're describing the Christian idea of eternal life, escape from death, with the individual persons retaining their individuality. That seems like more of a Greek idea than coming from Judaism, which is why you need the Hellenistic conquest. And I mean, there's probably not very many worshippers or Greek religious people anymore.
Yeah, Jesus wasn't the first person to actually. I don't know that Jesus talked about the immortality of the soul, or even necessarily explicitly suggested it. That's an interesting thing.
Wait, you don't, maybe the parable of Lazarus? Like, that's...
Yeah.
That seems very much like...
Yeah, but it's a parable, so then that... Whenever it's a parable...
But it's a parable to show, like, the mercy / wrath of God, right?
That's post Hellenizing of Christian interpretation. But again, like, Jesus was a Jew, so there's no it could have been, I'm saying it's ambiguous, like it could have been an allegory that pertained to the here and now, because my understanding of Judaism is like even more so than Christianity, like uber realism, like, and that I wouldn't deny that. I'm just affirming what you said, like the influence of, I think, particularly Platonic ideas on Christianity, and especially early Christianity, cannot be ignored. I think that atheists would be prone to want to look at that influence and say, is modern Christianity, or is it just like basically Platonism? And I think that Christians would want to say, no, Christianity redeemed Platonism.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Right. And the Greeks had this idea of no more heaven and hell because of natural revelation.
Right.
And Christianity was able to say, yes, but we have the truer version.
Right.
Which is Platonic.
Yeah, good point. I mean, that's a great point. So none of that is like a problem for me in terms of how I relate to Christianity.
Oh, I'm not saying it's should be a problem that disproves Christianity. I'm more saying, like, I think there are other religions that take death very similarly to the way Christianity does.
True, and I think you're even suggesting that, like, the Greeks were first.
Yeah, it's hard to say, like, because I think Norse mythology kind of leads this way too.
Greeks in terms of, like, how they influenced Christianity and the history of the West.
Right.
It wasn't like it was Jesus and Paul who were like, "Hey guys, immortality of the soul," but you never heard of that before. It's like, no, we heard of that before. Like Plato, Aristotle, like. Yeah. So I don't think Aristotle did believe in the immortality.
Yeah, I think I'm constantly told I'm an Aristotelian versus a Platonist,
right?
And I studied Plato enough to know that I'm not a Platonist, but I haven't studied Aristotle enough to know that I am.
Yeah. I think the basic difference would be, like, you understand Platonism pretty well by the way you described it. It's like, it's about forms. Yeah. So there's an ideal of every object.
There's the chairs in front of us, and then there's chairness that is, like, what all chairs strive to, like, derive from.
Right. Whereas Aristotle would have saw the properties of the chair as being what the chair was. The essence of the chair wasn't its form, but the essence of the chair was
the physical wood.
Right. What made it, like what makes a chair is the fact that it is designed a certain way and it's used a certain way. Yeah. So that.
Yeah, I'd probably fall into that camp.
Right. And that's the basic difference. And yeah, so I think you're exactly right that the Christianity's view of, that its view of its metaphysics regarding immortality of the souls was derived.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't even need it to be derived. I just, like, if we're saying atheism, nihilism, Buddhism kind of have the same metaphysics, and Christianity is different, I want to say, like, well, it is different, but it also has a group of religions that have the same, like, heaven, hell, afterlife, maintain your individuality after death. Well, because, like, Buddhism, Hinduism, right, the ultimate goal is to lose your individuality. Right. To reach nirvana, to join the big sky fairy. And in doing that, like, your essence gets absorbed and you just become one with the thing. Right.
Yeah, so I don't know that my point was so much that Christianity is unique in it that that's a feather in its cap. So much that the distinction between Christianity and Buddhism is actually large.
Yeah. Okay.
And that the gap between those two is, like, the atheism and nihilism are actually make better bedfellows with Buddhism than Christianity. I think that was the main point of my thesis.
Which sort of the irony of that is, at least some of the professors that I had in seminary would say that, like, you can't have what we would call Western atheism without Christianity. Like, so like Christianity leads to the Enlightenment, or at least to the Reformation, like, blah, 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 blah. Reformation leads to the Enlightenment, leads to what we have is the atheist that I would be today.
I would posit that, like, the Enlightenment is an unwitting recovery of Eastern metaphysics.
How so? Because for me, the Enlightenment, and even where I stand as a naturalist, would say, like, no, there's a distinct reality. Like, you're not, like, reality isn't an illusion. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's real and it's here and it can be tested and it can be poked and prodded and we can ultimately find.
Yeah. See, this is why you can't break down. This is why the Enlightenment is way too general of a topic to talk about.
Sure.
Because I look at a guy like Spinoza.
Yeah.
And I say, this is a guy who would get along really well with every pantheist that's ever been.
All right.
Like, this guy's basically put Eastern thought into Western words, and I don't even think he realized it. So you got a guy like Spinoza, and that's part of the Enlightenment. But then you have people like...
right, and with my background in physics and math, I'm thinking far more
like you're
of Copernicus, Kepler.
Yeah.
Right.
Voltaire.
Newton's a weird outlier. I mean,
yeah.
Those first, like, Kepler and, they're always pointed to as, like, Christian scientists. Okay, whatever, I'll grant you.
Right.
But, like, Newton's a real outlier because he's also, like, magic.
Yeah.
And you're like, dude, you like came up with laws of gravitation and a bunch of other stuff, like invented the field of optics, but you also, like, believed in alchemy and witchcraft and were trying to find gold, turn lead into gold.
Like, yeah. Well, then you have Hegel, who basically says all reality is spirit and all material is an emanation of spirit, which is perspective, which is consciousness. So, like, material is an emanation of consciousness. Consciousness is the thing that's real. Material is the thing that's not, and that is completely compatible with Eastern forms of thought about reality. And I think we're talking more about ontology than metaphysics.
Probably.
I think ontology is I think that's really more what I meant.
Okay.
When I said, like, the metaphysics of Buddhism, atheism, and I think I really meant the ontology. And granted that has to be broken down in terms of like atheism and nihilism, but I guess my main point is like if strict materialism has more to agree on with Buddhism about afterlife than it does with Christianity.
I mean, in some ways, I guess, but if Buddhism, you're going to join something larger, and like for me, I'm like, there's nothing. You don't join anything larger unless unless you want to call like the universe the larger thing. But I'm already part of it. So like my atoms get mixed back up in hopefully 40 more years. But
this is why Buddhists get frustrated when they talk with me though, because like you say there's nothing, and I say, well, that's what they're saying too. They're just, it's semantics. It's like if death is really like dissolution, disillusion, and also dissolution, like dissolved, like the loss of individuality is what we're all going towards, then whether you're a strict materialist or an atheist or a Buddhist, the material doesn't matter. And with Christianity, the material matters.
Yeah.
And with Judaism too, but in a different way. And I'd love to get a chance to talk about that too.
Yeah. Radio silence is great.
I put you in a think again.
Yeah, no, it's good. See, like I just think there is a difference, and maybe it's not. Maybe I'm thinking too broadly, and instead of just thinking about like the idea of death being the loss of individuality, that both Buddhists and atheists would say yes, like, and the Buddhists would say eventually, right? Because you get reincarnated until you can fully lose your individuality. I guess it's also for me like the supernatural aspect of Buddhism like doesn't jive with atheism per se, or at least my brand of atheism. Maybe I'm just wrong and you're right.
I don't think
to accept. There is no wrong and I can see your point, and I want to argue against it, but I don't know why.
I don't think of Buddhism as supernatural. Maybe we should define supernatural. I
mean, reincarnation seems pretty. So I guess maybe not supernatural. Like, it's definitely dualist, right? Because, like, when the Dalai Lama dies, eventually they're going to go look for the next Dalai Lama, and the way they're going to find him is they're going to grab a few objects that he owned, that every Dalai Lama has owned, right, back to whenever, and some objects that he never owned, and they're going to put it in front of babies that were born right around the time he died, and the one that picks the right object is him, because his soul remembers using that comb or that mirror or whatever they put in front of him, which means that the soul and mind are different than the shell that holds them. So like that to me seems supernatural. I think that Buddhists also believe in demons. They also believe in like, which is funny that, there's ultimately no God in Buddhism except for nirvana, I think. And you guys can write in and correct me if I'm wrong, but they do believe in demons. Like that's part of the point of all the bells and stuff, is to scare the demons away. Yeah. Demons are afraid of bells. So like those two aspects are very supernatural to me, because I'm not a dualist at all, right? I don't think you can be as a materialist.
Yeah, right.
Right. When I die, my brain function, the electrical activity in my brain ends. It's like you unplug a computer, like that's it.
Yeah, so, and we talked, I think maybe 2, 3, 4 podcasts ago about, I think we both got to a place where we were like, nihilism is a legit option. Yeah. It's like, I got you because we were talking about meaning and purpose of like ethics.
Yeah.
We were talking about the moral argument. Neither of us think it's like close and shut case for theism, but like, but I think we both got to the point where we were like, yeah, at the end of the day, there's no like transcendent reason to prioritize ethics. It's pragmatic.
Yeah.
And if it's pragmatic, then it actually doesn't matter in a way. It's like my interest in lessening suffering is mostly selfish.
Sure.
Okay, so I don't want to suffer. And if I don't want to suffer, I realize maybe I realize that there is a scientific connection between my suffering and other people's suffering. So like lessening other people's suffering is lessening mine. Yeah. But in the end, if I die, it's only like 70 years of suffering less. So I spent 70 years endeavoring to suffer less for whatever reason, for nothing. Yeah. So that's nihilism. And I think that Christianity is an antidote to that, in a similar way that it would be an antidote to materialism, and that I find Buddhism's response to like, well, it's not nihilism because, in the end, it's all consciousness discovering itself, as one. There is only one, and that there's all one. It's just like, that's a really fluffy way of saying there's nothing.
Is that true?
That's that's my feeling. I don't know if it's
different than nothing, though, right?
If everything is everything,
yeah,
then everything is nothing. I think. There's no distinctions.
No differentiation.
Right.
I mean, but the null set is different than the set one.
What do you mean?
So the foundation of set theory is that you start off with the null set and it has nothing in it.
Yeah.
Right. It's the thing that contains all the nothing. And you're like, well, that's nothing. That's the null set. Right?
Yeah.
So it's just two brackets, nothing inside.
Hi, I'm nothing. I'm also nothing. How can this be?
And then you have the next set, which is I forget the phrase, but it's the set one.
Yeah.
And so now, inside the brackets of the set is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now you get the number one, right? And then from those two things, we can build pretty much most of modern mathematics in our understanding of it.
That's the binary code, right?
No. It goes much deeper. So, was it Bertrand Russell? I think it was Russell. There was like this crisis in mathematics where they realized that like it was all built on sand, and like some of the original premises were just like wrong. So I think it was Bertrand Russell and someone else decided to like set out and show stuff, and it took 137 pages to prove that 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to because you could just sort of, you look at it, but like mathematicians want right. And so what they started off with is there's nothing, and then there's something. So the null set and the set containing one, and from there really built the foundation for modern mathematics, as well as I think like invented a new part of like set theory is like its own thing in mathematics, like different from calculus or trig, and they're all related, but like so for me, like nothing is a different set than something. I don't know. And it seems like for you, for something to be not nothing, you need the set 1 and 2. So that those two things are distinct and different. And their Venn diagram, like, they don't overlap.
Isn't this the same thing as our discussion about consciousness?
I don't know. Is it?
Well, consciousness is either merely the observation of reality. But if you say that, you go, well, then reality must be consciousness. Because if there's no reality for consciousness to observe, then what's it observing?
I don't know. I'm in the camp that if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, it makes a sound.
Yeah.
So I think, like, from what I hear you saying is, if there's no one around to observe the universe, like no consciousness, then the universe essentially doesn't exist. And I want to say, no, it still would. Just no one could observe it.
I'm saying that, I think what I'm saying is that if a tree falls in a forest, that consciousness made it happen. Huh. That in some way it's conscious of itself falling. The reality is consciousness. And if it isn't, then the tree didn't fall.
I don't even know where to go with that.
Like, I think it's Hegelian thinking. I think it's compatible with some Eastern thinking.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the Western atheism being influenced by Christianity, I don't think in ontology it is.
Well, I think
I think in ethics it is, and that's why it's confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll grant ethics.
I think that's the crisis of the West. It's like we got to a place ontologically where we're like, I don't know why anything exists. Some of us are more ready and willing to admit it than others. Mm-hmm. But if we're honest, if we could get every person in America or in the modern West in a room and all of them could be honest, unbiased, no confirmation bias, everyone would go, the ultimate question of why, the answer to that is none of us effing know.
Right. And I just want to clarify, like, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be people, I would think evangelical Christians, devout Muslims who would say, well, it's because God created it. And they'd be very confident in that.
Right.
But that's how, not why. It's like, why would a perfect being need or want to make stuff? Right. And that's where everyone has to throw up their hands and say, I don't know. Right. And there are apologetical reasons, but...
Or they could say, we're going to provide answers.
Right.
And that's thought. That's what thought is.
Yeah. But I'm saying at the end of the day, even though there's apologetic answers for why God created, the ultimate answer has to be, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, agreed. And my point is that, what was my point? That if that's the crisis of the modern West, is that we've reached a place of I don't know, but we still have Christian ethics hanging over our conscience. Not conscious as SCIOUS, but conscious as conscience. Like, so we're like, oh, we're supposed to be good. We're supposed to be self-sacrificial. We're supposed to be, and that's like Nietzsche's whole thing. It's like, God is dead and you killed him. So why do you care about ethics?
Yeah.
And you go, because the alternative's a freaking nightmare. That's why.
What's that movie where one day a year they all get to do whatever they want?
Right.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. The Plague. Is that what it's called? Not called The Plague. I know what you're talking about.
And they're all like one night murder. Of murder and rape and robbery, and then everyone goes back to living in a or Mad Max.
Yeah. So that's why I'm sympathetic to not apologetics, because apologetics to me, I think we agree, is entirely too presumptive in order to be able to deal with the situation that we're in, which is ontological nihilism.
Yeah.
But I think that if we can all agree that we're staring into Nietzsche's abyss, and most of us can say we don't want that, then we can agree to have discussions about religion, because then we can say, well, somebody once thought and they were a Christian, or somebody once thought and they were a Buddhist, or somebody once thought that they were a Muslim, so on and so forth. And that for me is why religion is relevant, because it is, as far as I can tell, the only antidote to nihilism. And my thesis would be that Buddhism is a really bad antidote to it. That's what I'm saying. It's like, ultimately you're saying everything is one, so therefore, like, you agree. You're an ontological nihilist.
Yeah, I guess I waver back and forth, because, like, why do we need a solution to nihilism? Like,
because you don't want people throwing their babies in dumpsters. I don't know.
But so this is where I think the influence of Christianity on society, like, it's the idea that, like, people have innate sin and evil, that if all restrictions were taken away, it would be Lord of the Flies, throw your babies away, right? Where, like, the vast majority of experiments and things that have happened, like Lord of the Flies happened. Like, there were a bunch of boys that actually got stuck on an island. And quite contrary to the Christian idea that influenced Lord of the Flies, that they were all evil and they'd, like, bully each other and kill each other. They actually, like, all worked really cooperatively and helped everyone survive. And it was like this, like, you know, and who knows if that would have continued for 20 years, 30 years, but it did, you know, and, like, other small experiments like that where diverse people have been stranded together, like, and contrary to what you would expect if humans were evil by nature, and ingrained with original sin, they, like, were very kind and generous and helpful. So, like, if that's just how people are, so we take away the Christian idea that people are inherently evil or broken or sinful, and however you want to define those three words, and you say, no, they're not. We're actually, like, a tribal species, which means, like, there's some things that happen with animals that are tribal, but overall, in general, we're good. Like, so, like, you're not going to get the plague.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to say that I didn't say anything about original sin. And that's not to invalidate your point.
Yeah.
But
I think that I'm just saying that that Christian idea has seeped into the why nihilism's bad is, like, you don't want to live in a society where you can get punched in the face because nothing matters. Right? Yeah. And I'm saying, like, even with nihilism, that's not what would happen.
Yeah.
That's this, like, deep-seated Christian idea that even without bringing up original sin, like, even other atheists have, because our culture is so ingrained with it.
Right.
Right. And I'm like, no, like, people would, like, help each other. And I mean, maybe I'm naive and wrong. And
I don't know. Like, I think and I'm not speaking as a Christian. I'm speaking as Matt. I'm not speaking on behalf of any religion. I honestly just think so much is based on what people feel they need in a particular moment. I think there's deviance and mental illness in the world. There's psychopaths. Yeah. There's sociopaths. Those things exist. But it's almost like a mutation. Right. Like, it's a...
Yeah, they're the outliers.
Right. I think most people operate on... Probably this is just not Pavlov, or who did the hierarchy of needs?
Maslow.
Like, what they felt needs.
Yeah.
Like, people are most cruel when they feel most threatened.
Right.
They could be wrong about the reality that they're feeling is threatening them. And that's why I think it appears evil, because we can't, from our perspective, see any survivalist or rationalist reason for why they're doing anything. So we just say, well, it must be pure malice,
right,
or cruelty. But I think if you psychologists dig deep enough, they'll be like, no, actually, that person was in their mind convinced that
right,
this is a survival situation.
yeah.
And that makes it complex when you throw 8 billion of us into the mix.
Right.
You know, we're all like freaking out. Like, you're like, I don't know you. You might have a gun on. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So that doesn't really answer the question about whether or not, at the basis, we're a species that's basically good. I mean, I would actually argue that even the fact that we're capable of looking at suffering and going, we don't want that, says something about that points away from original sin, I think,
Yeah.
as being a reasonable way to understand human nature, as being a reasonable way to understand evil. But then it comes down to like, well, if everything is consciousness is evil, what is evil, and what, like, you get into the whole debate about ethics and morality. I feel like, again, Christianity is and actually, I think this is probably true of all religions. It's a drawn-out historical thought experiment that people have codified because of the felt need to keep and to keep that which feels safe.
Yeah.
So
I guess I'm saying, join me in nihilism. It's not as unsafe as you think.
Right. And I'm saying Christianity as a preference. I'm not even saying join me, actually. I'm saying don't kill me because of those freaks that are out there. Not making the world a better place, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because Christianity allows one to meditate on finality, finiteness, duty, because time is short, makes you think about your duty to your fellows. And insofar as it encourages people in those ways, then I think it's a net good in the world.
Yeah. I think atheism does the exact same thing, which is, I think, partially why I'm like, it's not Buddhist.
Yeah.
Right? Because like, when you actually look at Buddhist monks, right, so versus like Christian monks, right? So like, and we're coming up on time, but when you think of like what nuns do, right? They run homeless shelters and they feed people and they like make the world, like, no one's like, nun. I mean,
right.
Probably in like 1950 parochial school, they were like, oh no, right? Because they were going to get slapped.
Yeah. It depends. Probably boomers are like, oh, nuns, because those are the people that
But like traditionally, like what nuns and monks did was alleviate the suffering of the poor, right? Monks in Buddhism, like, they get served by the people. Like they don't even like cook their own food, like the real serious ones.
Yeah.
Right? Like every day the village is supporting their butts so that they can meditate on nothingness and join the one.
Yeah.
While all the other suckers still have to like be reincarnated 17,000 times before they can even get to a place.
Yeah.
Right? And so like they're not doing lots of good. Like they've gone up to the mountaintop and said, I'm not dealing with anything else. Your suffering's an illusion. Get over it.
Yeah.
And I think atheism is much more like Christianity, where it's like, your time is finite. What do you want to be remembered for? How do you want to be charitable? And what is your duty to humanity or your family, or right? And you know.
Yeah. No, I'm tracking. Yep.
So I guess if we had a Venn diagram, there'd be overlap between all of them in certain ways, right? Like Buddhism and Christianity have supernaturalism. Buddhism and atheism are potentially more nihilist. atheism and Christianity have this idea of duty because time is short and you're not going to get an infinite, like you don't have an infinite lives where you can't start again.
Yeah.
So like you either did a lot of good or you didn't. Where I feel like in Buddhism and Hinduism to some extent, like you didn't do a lot of good this time, so you're a cow. But next time, if you're a good cow, you get to be a human again.
Yeah. So, but the difference between Christianity and atheism is like, yeah, there's that overlap in terms of time is short, here's duty. But I think with atheism, and this is the next podcast, I think this one should continue. This is a good discussion.
Yeah.
Atheism obviously doesn't have an afterlife.
Right. My brand of atheism doesn't. I think you could.
Yeah, right.
Have an atheism that says like there was no God to create, but your soul goes on.
Yeah.
It would be a very weird atheism.
Yeah.
I think most atheists are anti-supernaturalists.
So the finiteness of this life for Christianity is comes up against like the actual their actual belief in eternity. Mm-hmm. And so time is finite, but reality isn't. Life is finite, but reality isn't. And so therefore there's the idea of Christianity of the judgment, and that you're accountable to your deeds.
Yeah. And
so it's hard to imagine the same type of accountability existing within an atheistic framework.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no accountability at the end, except that most people, when they look into the void, are like, yeah, I don't want to be Hitler.
Right.
And it seems very unjust at the end of the day that like Hitler got to eat, did he eat cyanide or put a bullet in his head? Either way, and like that was it. He has no more suffering, according to my worldview. Like, there's nothing. He killed like 12 million people brutally.
Yep.
And like,
yep.
He just gets to not exist anymore. Like, done and done.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Well, thanks for making my argument.
Well, but I mean, my argument would be like, just because it feels wrong doesn't mean it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, I think the vast majority of humans are more sympathetic to like, I really hope Hitler is getting his due, than like, oh man, like get out of jail free pass. I mean, except that he's dead, and probably some brief moments of pain right before that, but nowhere near as much pain as he was able to inflict.
Yeah. So just briefly, I find Judaism's view of Sheol much more ambiguous than you seem to.
Yeah, I mean, I could be just taking what I've...
Yeah. I think Judaism is uncomfortably comfortable with not knowing about... like, you have... That was the thing with... There was a big debate in Jesus' day between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And really their difference was about whether there was a resurrection.
Right.
Another world that you
and
resurrected
Jesus agreed
into.
with the Pharisees there.
Yeah, he did. And the Sadducees was like, this is it.
Yeah.
Which begs the question, well, what do you do with a religion like that is sort of materialist? Like a non-supernaturalist.
But I think, and we are coming up pretty, but I think the Sadducees would say, and it sort of confirmed places in the Old Testament, that what you do is you worship the God to get more material than the other people. Like, you're a good person, so God gives you more babies, more land, more...
Yeah, and then you read, like, Ecclesiastes or Job, and I think that's...
But even at Job, like, the end of Job is God's like, well, I killed all your kids and stole all your cattle. Here's double. Thanks for winning my wager with Satan.
It's quite humorous, isn't it? Like, that wouldn't make me feel any better if I were Job.
Right.
I'm like, I love these kids. They're great.
Yeah.
But my other kids are still dead.
Yes.
My existential crisis is not over.
Yeah.
You still let my kids die. You don't get to just give me 9 more kids and be like, we're even, right? No, you killed my kids. You still killed my kids. He's like, no, Satan killed your kids. I'm like, you're God. You could have stopped him. You didn't. You killed my kids. And then you gave me 9 more and we're like, we're happy now. No.
But I mean, the end of the book is like, yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. Job gets 9
And that's
kids.
the end of that.
It's absurdism. Read Camus.
Super long podcast. I had fun.
Yeah.
Hope you guys listening had fun. Do you have anything?
I was hoping to just like end it on like read Camus, but maybe I'll end it on
No, you should read Camus.
watch He-Man
While you read Camus.
while reading Camus.
So did we come down? Is He-Man closer to Christianity or Buddhism or?
I don't know. I can't remember.
Probably classic paganism would be my guess.
Yeah, right. It seems like that.
Yeah.
It seems like
It's like atheism mixed with classic paganism because like no one's ever gone to church in any He-Man cartoon I can remember.
that doesn't. That doesn't. It's not like an allegory.
Worst cartoon episode ever. It's like
no. Did anybody go to church in the Chronicles of Narnia? That's clearly like a Christ allegory.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in
they do in The Simpsons.
Maybe in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's a scene at the beginning where they're in church, but
Yeah, I can't remember.
yeah, they do in The Simpsons, and that's clearly like pro-Christian propaganda.
But yeah, there's magic in He-Man, so they're definitely not on my camp. Watch He-Man and let us know what you think. Have a great week.